You're listening to the Moth of Glen Mailey. Night fell surprisingly early in the mountains, now that it was late October. So much so that the sudden darkening of the sky took Orla off guard as she finished cleaning around the cabin. She peered through Shannon's old lace curtains, remembering last night. She shuddered at the memory of wet, sharp hawthorn clawing across her face, snapping the curtains shut. In all honesty, she didn't want to be on the property tonight. It had properly spooked her for the first time, alone here without Shannon. But it wasn't like she had anywhere else to go. A small, indulgent smile played on her lips as she placed her mug into the sink. Maybe she didn't have to be. She grabbed her keys and headed down to the car, wondering what the odds were looking like tonight. Maybe she could find a merciful stranger to share a bed with. Shannon's old truck pulled into the dusty lot of McClary's, the only real gay club in Glen Mailey. There were only 3 real bars to speak of in the town to begin with. McClary's was the one that poured the truly stiff drinks that tended to bring an eclectic mix of people to the establishment. When the dust settled, she scanned the subdued crowd scattered outside, smoking cigarettes underneath the green light of the neon sign. Orla sighed as she parked, looking through the dusty windshield at the old saloon-style bar. She ran the risk of running into every uncomfortable hookup she'd ever had in Glen Mailey, but the truth was that the pickings were slim here in town, and if she wanted a hookup at all tonight, she had to go inside. She took another bracing breath and got out of the car, suddenly feeling the purpling bruise on her knee come painfully back to life. She winced softly and locked up the car, pulling her sweater against the cold as she headed inside. McClary sat like a time capsule on the inside, untouched by the elements. All the booths were still the same combination of dull brown and cracked green leather. Light mainly came from the dusty, stained glass billiard shades, and they did a poor job of reaching most of the establishment, leaving the far corners and the booths conveniently dark for privacy. Orla slid into a stool at the end of the bar, her eyes making their way around the room, heart sinking. It was a weeknight in a small town, and the only people out drinking tonight were old booze hounds, bikers, and a handful of college kids. The bartender approached and asked her what she wanted. Orla was relieved to see that no one behind the bar or at the bar tonight was anyone she recognized. She slid a 20 across the counter and asked for gin and tonic, light on the ice. The woman returned with a thick rocks glass, sparkling with gin and tonic water, topped with a sprig of blue-green juniper. Orla accepted the drink, lifting the juniper to study the pale leaves and dry blueberries. "Huh," she said, marveling at the sprig. "We get our gin from the local distillery," the bartender said, showing her the rustic bottle, hand-labeled. "Right around October, they start smoking their juniper." "You don't say," Orla said, rolling the cocktail around her rocks glass, intrigued. This felt fancier than anything she remembered at McClary's. "Give it a shot," the bartender said, a smile easing itself across her lips. Orla obliged, taking a sip. Her eyelids slid closed with a pleasure as the medicinal taste of gin met the rich roll of smoked juniper. It was an unexpectedly delicious way to round out the sharp taste of the mountain distilled gin. "Oh, that is too good, isn't it?" Her lips smacked with pleasure. The bite of the cocktail was full in her mouth and fresh like cold river water. "What made them want to smoke the juniper?" "Oh, that," the bartender laughed, starting to clean down the counter with her rag. "It's an old superstition the Celts carried over. Something about burning juniper for protection during Samhain." She moved to swipe the sprig of juniper into the trash with her rag. Orla's nimble fingers moved to save the small piece, plucking it off the counter before the rag was able to swipe it away. "Maybe I'll keep that for good luck," Orla joked, hoping it came off casual. When the bartender turned away, she stashed juniper into her bag. Shannon had tried to teach her so many superstitions, all through her summers here in Glen Mailey. Not everything she'd taught her had admittedly stuck, but Orla knew a sign when she saw one well enough. Orla took another sweeping glance at the bar at large, more from a doleful than illuminating place. Her eyes passed over the same tired patrons as she sipped her drink. The booze hounds, heads stooped low over the countertops, the college kids arguing over something loudly on a blaring phone, the bikers congregating by the threadbare billiards table, the blonde sitting alone at one of the center tables. Her eyes kept going and then paused, and skipped back discreetly to the blonde. When had she come in? She barely noticed the door during her whole conversation, and she was only sitting a few feet away from it. The woman sat engrossed in texting on her phone, the light from the phone illuminating her honey-tan skin and the soft gold lip gloss that lined her mouth. Her wavy hair sat piled on her head in a messy bun, clipped up to keep the hair off her graceful neckline. Her far-from-seasonal tube top and frosted lip gloss seemed to read less local and more West Coast socialite. That tickled Orla, seeing a valley girl so far from home all the way out here in Glen Mailey. She felt a smile cross her lips as the blonde's eyes flicked up from her phone and met Orla's. Orla immediately dropped her gaze, her heart beating. It had been years since the accidents that she had seen Mona's face randomly in a crowd. Always fleeting, always just an apparition superimposed on someone with the same build, the same eyes, same laugh. So she did what she always did. She blinked and she pushed the idea away, refocusing her vision on what was really in front of her. Except the blonde was no longer looking at her. Orla quietly cleared her throat out of embarrassment and looked back down at her own glass, watching the ice melt away into tiny, almost invisible slivers in her drink. Coming here was misguided, she realized. Even if there was someone remotely interesting to talk to, she was barely in a state to be good company to anyone. Trying to escape what was going on in New York and then back at the cabin by having a one-night stand would have worked a decade ago, she realized, but it was hardly going to do anything healthy for her now. She looked around for the bartender and found the space empty behind the bar. Maybe it was time to call it a night when the bartender returned. When she leaned back, she turned to see the blonde woman sliding into the stool beside her. Orla tried to hide her surprise by smiling instead. "You waiting for the bartender too?" "I was actually coming to talk to you," she said, pinning her down with her green eyes. Her glossy lips curved into a shy smile. Bartender was going to be pit stop number 2. "Oh, I see how it is," Orla joked, put at ease by how simple it felt to joke with her. "I appreciate the honesty." "What's your name?" the woman asked, giving her an intriguingly guarded but charmed smile in return. Orla couldn't help but take in the soft almond curve of her eyes and the high cut of her cheeks. The color of her eyes and her hair was totally wrong, but otherwise she looked exactly like Mona, down to the birthmark on her neck underneath her jawline. That last detail made Orla's breath catch for a moment. My name's Orla," she responded when she caught herself. "That's pretty." The blonde woman intoned, her long, willowy finger tracing the bar only centimeters away from the warmth of her own fingers. Orla tried to quiet the storm in her gut, captivated by the strange doppelganger of Mona, here in their old haunt. "What's yours?" "Regina." The woman introduced herself informally, making no effort to reach across and shake her hand. Instead, she leaned back from Orla, eyes regarding her with open appreciation, the body language of her chest and shoulders like an invitation for her to slide closer. "It's a pleasure," Orla said, feeling a warmth rise to her chest that she wasn't quite sure was the gin and tonic. "No, the pleasure's all mine," Regina smiled, moving her graceful hand to brush away the flyaway curls sticking to her cheeks. It was still a little warm tonight, and the stale air and beer was giving everyone in the bar a damp sheen of sweat. "Are you from around here?" "I used to be," Orla said, trying not to stare too directly or intently at Regina. The resemblance was uncanny, but Regina didn't need to be alerted to any of the complications behind that. It wasn't like any of that was her doing. "I grew up spending summers here with my grandma. I've been out of town for a while, though. How about you?" "Oh, so you missed them building that terrible old grocery chain by Allen's Road," she laughed. "You and I must have just missed each other. I moved here a few years ago." "Ships passing in the night." Orla gave her a smirk and finished off what was left of her gin and tonic. "Sure think so," Regina laughed, returning her smirk with a slow smile of her own. The realization caught up to her that she hadn't done this in a while. Orla looked down at the now empty glass, the remainder of the smile playing on her lips. She wondered for a moment if she was too drained to even entertain going home with someone right now. But the curve of Regina's neck and the soft damp curls that framed her face made her want to stay planted in the bar stool. What she wanted, more than anything right now, despite how exhausted and jumbled she felt, was just to have Regina's pretty manicured fingers sliding across the bar and up her forearm. "Either of you need a refill?" The bartender finally returned, sliding behind the bar. "Sure, we'll take another round. I'll take whatever she's having." Regina slid a 10 across the sticky bar, and Orla caught the moment where the bartender made eye contact with her, recognition briefly crossing her face. She made a motion to mention something, but then pressed her lips shut. The bartender silently nodded and slipped the 10 towards her, as if unwilling to take it from Regina directly. Orla frowned slightly before her phone began to buzz. The vibration caught her off guard since she had blessedly had no service up at Shannon's cabin. She discreetly peeked down at the caller ID from her pocket and felt a dull dread enter her body. Excuse me, I'm gonna go use the restroom, she said. She wandered to the hallway that led to the bathroom, the cold storage room. When she decided that she was sufficiently out of eyeshot, she picked up her phone. Hello?
Hey.
The static crunching of the line connecting and the ambient city din beyond. Orla could hear the rush of cars and distant wail of ambulances.
Sorry. Hold on. I'm trying to connect my headphones.
More crunching on the line, and an indistinct muffled shuffling.
Okay. Alright, that should be good. What's up?
Your show, you called me, she replied, trying to keep the patience in her voice.
Right, yeah, sorry. I've been trying to get in touch with you since yesterday. Your mom says you have called in?
I'm house sitting right now, she said.
Hold on, sorry. Why does it sound like you're in the middle of a honky-tonk right now? Where are you?
The voice on the other line interrupted her, preventing her from finishing. I'm in Tennessee, Orla said.
You're what?
The voice asked in disbelief. I'm house sitting for Shannon until the 23rd. I texted you this last week.
Right, sorry, yeah. Real quick, did you get any mail for me at the apartment? I was waiting on the letter from the city about my exams.
I thought you changed your address and set up the mail routing for yourself.
Right. No. I didn't quite get to that in time, and I still haven't managed to get anything in the mail. I was just wondering if you received anything. Also, I have 2 boxes of your stuff in my car, so I just wanted to ask how you wanted me to get these back to you if you're not back till the 23rd.
Orla put an annoyed hand on her hip, peering discreetly to see if the blonde was still at the bar. She could see between the beams of the bar that she was scrolling through her phone, waiting for the bartender to return with drinks. Yeah, Orla said, switching her attention back to her ex-fiancé. So, like I explained last week, I'm not going to be home, so I recommend you get in touch with my mom and coordinate a drop-off. She has the apartment key, so she might be able to check for any mail.
Got it. Okay, thanks so much, Orla,
came Dale's relieved response. She burned with frustration, knowing that he could have just figured out the logistics of all of this himself, but he was still relying on her to fill in all the gaps. Do you have time when you get back to grab dinner? The blonde at the bar suddenly got up, eyes looking through the bar for the restrooms. Orla ducked back into the hallway. Dale, I gotta go, she said, fumbling to hang up the phone. She slipped it back into her back pocket just in time to see Regina cross the threshold into the hallway. Her blonde hair had a soft green halo from the bar lights, looking like a lovely apparition. When she noticed Orla, she gave her an endearing shrug of her bare tan shoulders. The bartender was taking too long, so I figured I'd see what's going on back here. Her eyes met Orla's with a shy but purposeful depth to her gaze. Orla reached out her hand and pulled her in. Regina melted into her grasp, and they both found themselves pressed flush against each other, against the far wall, mouths mashing together. Regina smelled distinctly of pine needles and wet bark, which caught Orla by surprise. She buried her hands in the blonde's hair and softly slid her tongue between Regina's glossy lips. Regina suddenly hissed and made a sound inside of her chest like a cat's warning yowl coming deep from some dark alley. She pulled away from Orla, and the look on her face looked as if she'd bitten her unexpectedly. What's wrong? Orla asked. Regina's delicate hand went to her reddening lips. Did you just drink something with Juniper? She whispered in the dark. Yeah, Orla said, feeling mortified. I was having a gin and tonic. Is everything okay? I'm allergic, Regina said, struggling to get the words out, as if through nausea. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that was an allergy. Can I do anything? Orla offered, feeling everything start to unravel. Regina held up her hand, the other to her mouth, to prevent her from coming any closer. No, I'm okay. I'm gonna go if you don't mind. The blonde rushed back to the bar and grabbed her purse, slipping out the front door. Orla stood in the dark swell of the back hallway, processing the moment. When the discomfort subsided enough for her to walk through the bar again, she made her way straight for the door and then for Shannon's pickup. Her boots carried her wordlessly through the rough gravel. She didn't bother to look for Regina in the parking lot. She just wanted to get away from being perceived. Slamming the truck door shut after her, she twisted the key in the ignition and drove back up the mountain to Shannon's property. Dark, almost formless clots of trees slid by the mountain road, illuminating in slices only by headlights. She let the ghostly yellow road signs and familiar bent guardrails guide her muscle memory home, too numb to think. When she pulled up next to the house, she snapped the car off and sat there, eyes unfocusing on the small, sole globe of light by the front door. Insects swirled around its orbit gracefully, trying to get closer but not too close to the heat of the exposed bulb. Shannon would be lighting the back porch light right about now, and making her nightly coffee. It made Orla think about how much she missed her. She lowered her defeated head to rest against the steering wheel. The embarrassment and discomfort took a while to subside, smoothed out by the even breathing in the cool, damp dark of the car. The loneliness that remained, however, when the other slid away, pressed against her ribs in a more acutely painful way. Orla flipped down the car's visor, opening up the mirror. Sometimes, in order to keep herself from crying, she had to take a good, long, hard look at herself. When she did, what she saw was a pair of tired, dead eyes staring back at her in the orange sodium-colored light. Her skin looked splotchy, cracked, and dry, with deep purple settled beneath her eyes. Her reflection, she figured, looked about right for someone who had been dodging sleep in her ex-fiancé's phone calls. Glen Mailey and Shannon's was supposed to be a getaway from it all, yet here she was, terrorizing herself with ghost stories and painful hookups, thinking about Mona. Her lips smacked again, dry, almost regretful she had left the bar and her second drink for a moment. There were sleeping pills and a huge, comfortable bed just 20 feet in front of her, and for once, she was going to make the healthy choice by staying home and going back to bed. Orla collected her keys and bag and hopped down from the trunk, taking a long, deep, fresh breath of air outside. It smelled like fresh pine and wet bark, a deep wooded smell that lingered all around her in the evening. A breeze stirred the trees and she could hear the dying leaves rubbing together, sounding like a forest's secretive whispers. She shrugged off the feeling of goosebumps that ran up her arm from the sudden shift in temperature. Producing the cabin keys from her key ring, Orla began to cross the old packed dirt to the front door. As she did, the wind began to pick up slightly the way it did before an autumn rain, sliding like silk through the shaking leaves. "Orla!" someone called behind her, sounding like it was from back behind the car. She froze, trying to calculate exactly how far away she had heard her name. It didn't matter, though, she realized with a trickling dread. There was no one out here. For miles in every direction. Shannon had always told her this. If you hear your name in the woods at night, know you didn't. She took a quick, bracing breath, trying to remind herself that all sorts of owls and foxes lived in the tree line beyond. Very deliberately and very slowly, she began to continue towards the porch, careful to keep her eyes on the front door and only the front door. "I'm tired," she said to herself like a mantra under her breath. "I'm tired. I am hearing things. It's just coyotes." A woman's voice, whisper close. She could feel it on the shell of her ear as if darting past her. Orla screamed and reached for her bag to pull out the mace. Instead, her fingers grasped around the sprig of juniper, yanking it out as well as her keys. Something yowled, deep and resonant and low in the dark. Angry. She heard it scrambling back through the low brush and desperately tried to squint out into the dark to see where it was coming from. Orla scrambled back to her feet and thoughtlessly dove underneath the porch, squeezing herself beneath the tight concrete pillars of the cabin. Between the gaps in the old latticework, she watched as a human foot came out of the moving bushes, wearing heels. The foot seemed too long somehow, compared to the slender tan leg. Another slender leg slid out of the bushes, and then the darkened form of a woman, her blonde hair caught only just barely in the light of the front door. Orla's blood ran cold, taking in Regina's form in the dark. She wasn't sure if it was just the dark playing tricks on her, but her body seemed to have the wrong proportions from this angle. Her delicate arms were too long. Her manicured fingers reached down well past her knees. Regina's mouth opened and closed softly, letting out a soft, rasping coo. It called out again to her in the dark, and she felt her body chill when she could hear and feel the voice throw itself all around her like a disembodied creature of its own. She shuddered in the dark and tried to press herself deeper beneath the house. An old wasp nest crunched beneath her shoe. The creature made a wheezing, breathing noise and snapped her head in Orla's direction. She lowered herself down on all fours, her terrible, sharp shoulder joints jutting out from her slender back. Orla panicked, feeling backed into a corner here, trapped beneath the house. There was nothing but concrete foundation behind her, nowhere to run. It galloped through the tall grass at her, no longer moving like a human in any recognizable way. Orla crawled backwards on her hands and knees, breath grating between her teeth. Stop, please stop, please stop. Something dark and immensely fast shot out in the dark beneath the house, grabbing her by the ankle. She realized to her horror as she was being pulled out that it was Regina's delicate hands, wrapped cold and vice-like around her foot. "Let go of me!" Orla screamed, kicking at the hand, trying to reach for anything that she could grab onto. As she leaned upwards, the hand yanked her out, and her head hit the low beam of the under-porch structure. Her vision dimmed for a moment as she fell flat on her back. When her eyesight started to come back to her in small bursts, she could see the porch slide away above her, and then the revelation of the moon and the stars, bright in the ink-blue sky. Grass swayed gently above her with the mid-October wind, and she started to think that she couldn't remember if she had gotten the chance to feed Anya one last time. Bent, elongated form of Regina neared her in the grass. Orla took a pained breath and felt her world spinning. The stars were so bright tonight, sparkling with some unshared laughter. She knew death was coming next, but not why. The silhouette of Regina darkened her view of the sky, filling her world with dark, unsettling wheezing. She could feel Regina's hair tickle her face, and the full curve of her lips hovered above her. In the half-desaturated dark, all she could see was Mona. "Hey, Em," she said, feeling relief slide out of her as tears rolled down her face. A reunion. Maybe death was merciful after all. "Hi, Or," the creature said sweetly to her. She leaned up to accept the kiss of death from Regina. Instead, however, she felt a swift gust of wind brush against her body. She felt it stir the grass around her as she heard something heavy land in the grass in front of them. Orla couldn't see it from where she was situated, her view partially blocked by the creature's body, but she knew for a fact that whatever was happening out there, they were no longer alone. Dread filled her body, wondering if her death was about to be even more brutal than she imagined. That was when the creature's body was unceremoniously yanked off of her like a rag doll. The creature yowled territorially like an overgrown cat, deep from its chest. She could see some of what was happening as she laid there dazed, her vision coming in and out. All she could tell from the level of noise and aggression was that the creature was fighting with something hard. She heard the creature scream and lunge at a wide lurking shadow in the dark. The dark silhouette slipped sideways impossibly fast and caught the creature, crunching and folding its lanky body into two impossible angles. The creature only had one moment to scream before its lungs were punctured and its ribs collapsed. Orla laid her head back in the grass and couldn't think of anything to do but play dead, hoping that whatever larger, far more terrifying thing that had just killed Regina, it operated by the same rules as bears did. She bit back her tears and relaxed her entire body, praying to anything that was listening that this would work. Moments went by with her eyes closed and she could hear nothing but the vicious crunching of bones and the ripping of flesh as the creature was consumed. Her stomach lurched when the silence descended into the grass, and she could hear nothing but the late-season crickets and the slow breathing of whatever was in the backyard with her. Then she heard the rustle of grass near her. She took agonizingly slow breaths, trying to keep her trembling body still. Footsteps, very distinctly from 2 feet, at a surprisingly human gait, neared her head and then crouched down. She felt something warm and soft touch her hand after a moment, something so surprising that she almost jumped out of her own skin. A hand lifted hers, warm thumb pressing down on her bruised wrist, checking her pulse. Before she had a chance to open her eyes, a sleep stole her, body and mind. When Orla woke the next morning, she found herself crumpled in the grass, now a few feet from the porch. She stood, sore and dizzy, taking stock of the front yard. Had she been roofied or drugged somehow at McClary's? Her mind searched through a list of explanations, trying to find one that covered her aching, clearly bleeding head and the very real blood trail of disturbed grass where something had been carried away against its will into the trees. She lifted a nauseated hand to her mouth, trying to get some sort of handle on how disoriented she felt. Something blue caught her eye and she looked down at her hand. There was a blue silk ribbon tied around her wrist, finished off with a bow. It was a smoke blue and only a little wet from the grass. Not tattered or faded, but brand new. Someone or something had deliberately tied a ribbon around her wrist. She shuddered, looking up from her wrist into the early morning tree line. Thanks for listening. The miniseries returns with new episodes every Friday until its series finale on November 16th. Other housekeeping news is that you can now officially leave comments on Spotify. Make sure to drop us a comment, let us know what you're thinking of the series so far, rate the series on Spotify or wherever you're listening, and then make sure to share with your friends if you want them to check it out as well. If you are feeling particularly generous and you want to support what we do here, you can follow the Linktree links in our bio on socials and buy us a coffee or become a patron. As always, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time. And remember,